Hello, everyone, and welcome to this lecture on crisis literacy as part of the... Oh, yes, I can see now. There's someone else. Hello?
Hi. Hi.
Hello, host. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I cannot hear you.
You can't hear me?
No, I cannot hear you. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to write. Okay.
Can you try? Yeah. Now, can you hear me? I can hear you now.
Yes. Do you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you. Great.
Okay. So just please keep going and I will take the thread until the end.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and welcome again to my talk on crisis literacy and on creative tools that help develop this key competence of the 21st century. My name is Justine Walter. I have been researching futures for many years and currently serve as Managing Director of Digital Impact Labs Leipzig. In my talk, I will focus on three aspects. Why do we need crisis literacy? What is a crisis and what is crisis literacy? And thirdly, how to build crisis literacy, this competence. So why do we need crisis literacy? In the recent years, there has been a lot of talk of all kinds of literacies: digital literacy, financial literacy, futures literacy, most importantly. Now, why crisis literacy? And I am sure all of you have noticed this kind of situation. So within our enterprises, within universities and other institutions, we still like to plan. And we often plan linearly. So we have a status quo and we define a target picture or an aim, and then we define milestones or way towards that. However, the way that we define often doesn't match reality, because reality now is very, very complex. Everything is interconnected, and it is very hard to plan in such a setting. Now, this is also visible if you look at the crisis or at risks. If you take a look at the global risk report that is issued by the World Economic Forum every year, then you find that there are now numerous risks from all the steep categories: so societal, technological, economic, environmental, and political. And these risks are not only getting bigger and bigger, but they are all interconnected, and they together create a situation that is now termed holy crisis and has been called a condition of this present moment, which we can see with the war in Ukraine, with all the extreme climate events, with the COVID-19 pandemic that we still feel the aftermath of. And so polycrisis is here, and polycrisis is likely to stay and become the new normal. So we highly likely won't get rid of it so soon. And this is why many people in recent years, there has been a lot of talk about the VUCA world, VUCA being a military term in use since the 1980s, and defining a situation that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I would like to argue that we could add a fifth letter, another C, which stands for catastrophic, because these four dimensions of the world that we see are likely leading to situations in which we experience a lot of transformations that are likely unwanted and will change completely the way we live work and act. So before this backdrop of this complex VUCA world and the poly crisis, I would like to argue that we need another kind of literacy, namely a crisis literacy. Now, what is crisis literacy and what is a crisis? I myself, I'm an ancient historian, so I always like to go back to the origins of words. And if you look at the origins of crisis, then you come to ancient Greek, and in ancient Greek, crisis defined a decision, a choice, an election, or a judgment that someone made. It had another meaning of separation or dispute between different parties. And thirdly, it meant a crucial or decisive situation in a battle or some other process. Now, if you look up a modern definition of crisis, then you find in a dictionary the definition that a crisis is a situation in which something or someone is affected by one or more very serious problems. And it's already in this modern definition that we find that crisis for us in modern times is something negative. And this is both highlighted by the part of very serious problems that define this crisis situation, but also in the context that we speak about crisis. We speak about existential crisis. We speak about midlife crisis. We still remember the financial crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, political crises, and the ongoing energy crisis. Many of them now becoming poly crisis that I already introduced. So for us today, crisis is something negative. However, if you go back to the ancient Greeks again and to the original meaning of the word, then a crisis is not necessarily negative. It's a neutral term because it is a crisis is a situation in which, of course, there are risks and grave dangers threatening the party that has to make a decision. But a crisis is also a moment that leads to that opens up new potentials, new pathways, and changes the status quo. The ancient Greeks also called this a kairos moment, and that you may also have heard because it's recently being a bit en vogue again. Kairos being in the picture on the right-hand side of my slide, he was the god who marked this moment, this decisive moment in which our decisions as humans basically shaped the path towards the future. So crisis is not necessarily something negative, but is something that changes status quo. So if you want to look at it a bit more schematically, then it's basically that there is some contingency here in the definition of Capra and Luisi, a moment in which simultaneous external factors occur, and in their simultaneous occurrence shape a specific temporal and spatial situations and create a specific event. So, for example, if you have an earthquake, this earthquake has to occur in an area where people live. It has to provoke buildings to collapse, and it has to be perceived by people in order to actually provoke a reaction, namely a crisis. So this simultaneous occurrence of several mostly external factors, so they are not necessarily human actions, although human actions contribute to a situation becoming a contingency. This contingency then often leads to a crisis situation in which people that are affected by the contingency have to make a decision because the status quo is impossible to continue. After an earthquake that has destroyed the infrastructure and the buildings, it's impossible to just go on like in the way before the earthquake because the status quo is destroyed, and it's necessary to take some action to define a way forward. That means in this point of crisis, where the continuation of the status quo is impossible, it's up to people to decide whether they want to choose innovation or catastrophe. If they choose catastrophe, so if they make a decision that will not create a positive way forward, then catastrophe is likely to happen. Catastrophe here meaning a radical and potentially unwanted transformation of the way these people have lived, have worked, have interacted. And this transformation also in all kinds of social spheres, so both in terms of the way society interacts, as well as in cultural, economic, and political terms. And in order to exemplify what I mean by that, I would like to give you an example. Again, for my doctoral dissertation, I researched a lot of earthquakes in antiquity in order to find out case studies on what coping mechanisms are successful, and in order to find out implications for our future coping with disaster. And one of the most remarkable examples of catastrophe or of contingency leading to crisis, leading to catastrophe, is the destruction of the Greek polis of Helike in the 4th century before Christ, when this polis on the Peloponnese was befallen or was struck by a major earthquake followed by a tsunami. And one of the ancient historians, Diodorus Siculus, wrote, "Never in the earlier periods had such disasters befallen Greek cities, nor had entire cities, along with their inhabitants, disappeared as a result of some divine force, wreaking destruction and ruin upon mankind. The extent of the destruction was increased by the time of its occurrence, for the earthquake did not come in the daytime when it would have been possible for the sufferers to help themselves, but the blow came at night, so that when the houses crashed and crumbled under the forces of the shock, the population, owing to the darkness and to the surprise and bewilderment occasioned by the event, had no power to struggle for life. The majority were caught in the falling houses and annihilated, but as they returned, some survivors dashed from the ruins, and when they thought they had escaped the danger, met with a greater and still more incredible danger. For the sea rose to a vast height, and a wave towering even higher washed away and drowned all the inhabitants and their native lands as well." So here's an example of the complete destruction of a city. The city did not exist after this contingent occurrence of earthquake and tsunami, because they had not managed to take precautions to forge bonds with other polis that would have helped them or the survivors to actually rebuild the city and continue. So this is an example that you might expect, an earthquake destroying a city. However, crisis situation, neither in modern times nor in the past, actually has to lead to catastrophe and destruction. But it can also lead to innovation. And innovation here I would like to define as the implementation of a structured and desired transformation. So here, after the crisis, the status quo is also different. So the way of life, the way people work together is also a different one than before. However, this is a better state than before because people have chosen to go this way and taken the right action in order to make it come true. And there's also an example from for that from antiquity. Because 150 years after the events in Helike, there was a major earthquake in Rhodes. The earthquake that destroyed the famous Colossus, one of the landmarks of this island in antiquity. And this earthquake, it overthrew the Great Colossus and the larger parts of the walls and dockyards, so it destroyed the infrastructure. But the adroit policy of the Rhodians converted this misfortune, here the historian who wrote that, Polybius, also uses the term kairos, into an opportunity, and under their skillful management, instead of adding to their embarrassment, it became the means of restoring their prosperity. So decisive in human affairs, public or private, is the difference between incapacity and good sense, between idle indifference and a close attention to business. Good fortune only damages the one, while disaster is but a means of recovery to the other. This was illustrated by the manner in which the Rhodians turned the misfortune that befell them to account. They enhanced its magnitude and importance by the prominence which they gave it, and the serious tones in which they spoke of it, as well as by the mouth of their ambassadors, as in the intercourse of private life. And they created such an effect upon other states, and especially upon the feelings of kings, that they were not only overwhelmed with presents, but made the donors feel obliged for their acceptance of them. So here, it's a completely different situation. You had the earthquake, you had the crisis, and the Rhodians choose to have a common narrative and to go out into the world and ask for donations in order to rebuild. And they managed to actually be more successful after the earthquakes than they were before. And even ancient authors who wrote about this earthquake in Rhodes already noted that this was a human decision. So it was not something that happened by chance, but humans made the decision to turn this crisis into innovation, into a situation that was better than the one before the earthquake. So what we can learn from this is we have to understand that we are in the middle of a crisis, and we have to understand what may happen, and we have to imagine what could come out of the situation in order to act accordingly and turn the crisis into innovation. And this is what I'd like to call crisis literacy, because it's a complex set of skills that you need in order to do this. And I would like to define crisis literacy as the ability to anticipate a crisis, to understand how it may unfold, to imagine different outcomes, and to act accordingly. And I believe this is only possible through good understanding of the system that is affected by the contingency and all the variables within the system, as well as a high level of futures literacy, a shared vision of a desired future, and a familiarity with critical situations as such. Now, if this is crisis literacy, then how can we build crisis literacy? And I would like to introduce a few ideas on that. So at first, I think crisis literacy is, in order to be crisis literate, we need a skill set of other already existing skills. And I think one of the most important one among them is system thinking. So we need to understand complexity. We need to understand all the nodes within our system in order to identify risks, to anticipate crises that may come out of the interplay of these risks, and also in order to understand leverage points for action that we take. The second crucial skill for futures literacy, for crisis literacy, is futures literacy, a topic that is very prominent in this conference, because futures literacy enables us to imagine different futures after the crisis, and then also to identify the ones that are desirable, that we'd like to create, in order to afterwards define a path towards that future and define next steps that we can take. A third major skill that is necessary in order to become crisis literate is storytelling, because overcoming a crisis is impossible to do alone. As I showed you in the example of Rhodes, the Rhodians were successful because they had a common narrative. All of them told the same story about what happened and what they wanted to achieve in the future. And this story convinced the donors from other states to give them funds and to help them rebuild and recover. And this makes storytelling very crucial for tackling any kind of crisis, because the people affected need a shared and compelling narrative that is understandable for everyone, that both make sense of what's happening and make sense of the way forward and is motivational for the action to take. So I believe system thinking, futures literacy, and storytelling are three major aspects of crisis literacy that we need for the future. And the second aspect is, that was also my definition of crisis literacy, we need to become familiar with crises. So I think during the past 3 or 4 years, many of us have had ample experience with crisis because there were so many crises happening around us, but we still have not got used to crisis quite as much as we need to. So I think we should still make an effort to become more familiar with crisis situations. And I think this is possible by working with scenarios and simulations, because I think then we all know, many of our institutions are now actually mapping risks or creating lists of risks and trends by mapping these implications and weaving them into scenarios that show potential crisis situation, and then thinking about how to act in these crisis situations may help with actually becoming more familiar with these situations, and once they occur, being used to what to do. The second thing is improv or improv theater. I think this is a great and creative and fun tool to actually try out what to do in critical situations. So this would be an approach in which the scenarios are not made by the people who would like to build crisis literacy, but actually a set of predefined scenarios from the past, or from science fiction literature, from something that is more realistic, and then asking people to act out their responses to these crisis situations. So thirdly, I think a great tool to actually build crisis literacy are futures literacy labs. So I think if you remember my past slide, I showed you that futures literacy is one major aspect of crisis literacy. So these futures literacy labs also help becoming familiar with crises and embrace uncertainty that is always involved in crises, and thus making visible what is happening in crises, questioning our assumptions of normality or of the defined future, and also allowing us to think about how to act in critical situations in the future. And this is everything that I wanted to say. I think I'm not sure if there's time for questions. If there is, then I'm happy to answer them.
Yes, there is time for questions. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. So in the chat, you said, is there any difference between crises and wildcards? Well, wildcards are something theoretical. So wildcards are what we use in scenario planning. So we imagine a wildcard situation. A crisis as a wildcard come true. So the wildcard is the theoretical situation, the hypothetical event, and crisis is the wildcard that has become reality. Thank you for the question.
Okay, anyone else question or a comment for Justine? Okay, let's see. I don't see any other question or comment. Okay, so Justine, something to say before leaving this session?
No, thank you very much. I was very happy to be part of this conference, and I'm excited to hear some more talks later. And all the best with the next sessions.
Nice, thanks a lot.
Thank you.